I woke up with a pulsing headache, a throbbing pain at the back of my head. The world was dizzying for a moment, and I couldn't even properly make out any shapes or colors. As I came to, I soon realized that I was handcuffed to what looked like a school desk. A quick study of my surroundings told me that this was accurate. There was a man right alongside me, also on the floor, cuffed to a desk, and behind him another, and behind him another. I was in some kind of classroom, with at least a dozen or so people, all of whom seemed to be chained up. My eyes took in the surrounding posters and the artwork. There were children's drawings and safety reminders all scattered across the wall, most of them older than I was. And then my attention went to the front of the class, the blackboard where teachers should have been to instruct. In its place was a simple, concise message, written in chalk and large enough for all of us to read. Tornado drill, 8:05 a.m. I checked the clock on the wall. According to it, we only had a few minutes before the event was supposed to happen, so I talked fast. Hey you, where are we? I asked, kicking the man's foot next to me. His eyes flared at me suspiciously. Like I would know. How should I know? I decided to not bother talking to him anymore, and I turned to my left. A petite young woman was there. What about you? Do you remember how we got here? I asked, yanking on the handcuffs. The sound they made as they rattled against the desk was echoing everywhere. I was in the mall with my boyfriend, and we were headed toward the food court when I don't remember anything after that, she admitted timidly. I could tell by the look on her face that she was more worried about the boy than her own safety, but something told me that pretty soon that would change. The clock struck 8:05 a moment later, and suddenly this shrill scratching noise came on over the PA intercom. This system had to date back to prior the 1980s. I thought to myself as I tried to cut my free hand over my ear and hold my head against the desk. Attention class of 2021, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. A very strange voice announced. It was difficult to say for sure what gender it even was. It didn't sound quite human. And then there was a sharp click, and a grainy old recording of the American flag pledge came on over the speakers. As it finished, all of us looked at one another in confusion and fear. What was going on? Attention room 3, your tornado drill will begin now. Move to the hallway. How the heck are we supposed to do that? I said out loud. Not that I expected the strange machine to respond. Instead, there was a loud rattling from above, and it made me look at the ceiling of the room for the first time. Above every desk, there was an air vent, and on cue, those vents opened. And then abruptly, loud noises and shards of glass spit out from the vents and straight towards us. I reacted in a moment, yanking my body toward the floor as the broken glass sliced across the back of my neck. Using the top of the desk as cover, I did my best to huddle there. A portion of my thigh and right foot damaged from the sudden unexpected rush of projectiles. Others in the class weren't so lucky. A man sitting 2 desks in front of me had a glass shard impaled straight in the neck. A woman had several hit her across her cheek, and the rain of sharp blades continued to come. The hallway, the woman beside me shouted. We can scoot the desks and use them for cover. I nodded and slowly pushed my desk that was acting as a shield as the rest of the ceiling. It seemed to rumble and shake, and the broken glass was now being replaced by more dangerous burning chemicals. Those that weren't under their desks were given second-degree burns as we all shouted for them to take cover and then move. The hallway felt like it was a lifetime away. I pushed the desk slowly, doing my best to try and time the pattern of the falling chemicals in the glass. My hands were already burned from the hot toxins, and my shins were bleeding. I just needed to get out of here, I resolved as I pushed toward the door. Some of the others were fighting for the door, trying to shove through and pull their desks along. I knew that there would be no way that we could escape as long as we were all shackled down. And then I looked up at the burning acid and had a horrible realization. We need to let these chemicals burn through these cuffs, I told the girl. I held my arm at a specific angle and then scooted my desk toward the proper position. I bit my tongue and held in a scream as the torturous acid hit my skin and the metal at the same time. It only took about 10 seconds for me to be free. And at the same time, I ran through the door, urging the others to do the same. The girl managed to pull through with only minor burns and 3 others. And then we heard a strange clang and realized that the class door was sealed shut. The ones that didn't make it out were now slamming their hands against the door, trying to wriggle the knob, but it was pointless. Next, we watched as the vents reversed flow and sucked the other people in the class toward the ceiling. It was like watching a real twister take up houses. All of them slammed against the roof of the classroom as we watched from the safety of the hallway. And just like that, the nightmarish event seemed over and I was standing in the hallway, looking down at my burnt, shaking hands. The other survivors were turning their attention to our new location, a long tile hallway that seemed to connect to at least a dozen other classrooms just like ours. And much like us, others had escaped their horrible classrooms at the last minute and were trying their best to cope and recover in the hallway. We all shared the same beaten and confused expression, none of us sure where we were or how we got here. Attention class of 2021, please make your way to the main auditorium for a word from our principal, a voice said over the intercom. Then the lights in the hallway came on fully to illuminate the path toward the right. I looked to the others for ideas, uncertain of what we should do. There was an emergency exit nearby, but it didn't take one guess to assume that it was sealed shut. So instead, all of us shuffled our feet down the hallway, following the guiding light to our next room. We soon arrived at what looked like it to be a cafeteria with long tables all arranged with a simple school breakfast. Packaged donuts, boxed milk, fruit bowls. At least 30 meals were all lined up and ready for us as we had entered the room. A couple of survivors went to check the exits, and none of which had any windows toward the outside, while the rest of us settled in and decided to eat. Surprisingly, the food was delicious and fresh. Our captors must want us somewhat healthy, I said as I carefully opened the milk, my hand still shaking. And then I saw a shadow cross the back curtain of the stage that overlooked the cafeteria. Immediately, I jumped up and pointed, and a few others saw it too. "Who goes there?" one man shouted aloud. The shadow paused. It looked unnaturally tall. And then we heard this strange, obnoxious laugh. A second later, and the curtain pushed back and revealed a costume mascot. A large stuffed animal costume that resembled a walrus, with a goofy cartoon smile and enormous floppy arms. From the center of the stage came a microphone that rose up toward the walrus's mouth. "Well, what a squeaky clean group you are. Welcome, class of 2021. Welcome to final school," it announced happily. I couldn't tell for sure if this thing was a robot or a person in a suit. "Today has been fun, but don't forget here at final school, the fun can only last until the bell rings, and then it's time to learn. "Are you for real? What is this?" one man asked again. He abruptly jumped toward the stage, ready to attack the mascot. A moment later, 2 children pushed their way out from the curtain and stood in the way of his attack. It made the moment pause in confusion, and that was all that it took. One kid whipped out what looked like a cattle prod and struck the man straight in his chest with it. He flew back hard to the tile floor, coughing and wheezing. And then a few other children appeared alongside the mascot, all of them wearing genetic uniforms, and all of them looked like they were emotionally disconnected to whatever the heck was going on. "Remember to play nice," the walrus chuckled. Just as he had finished, we heard a buzz and the doors to the cafeteria had unsealed themselves. "Recess," the kids all squealed as they ran back behind the curtains and out of sight. All of us that had survived the initial insanity gave each other a long stare, and then we bolted for the doors. I could see sunlight and I was ready to taste fresh air, but it was all a mirage. The moment that we stepped out to the playground, I suddenly realized that I wasn't looking the sky at all. It was some strange reflective surface that covered the entire surrounding area. "It's like we're trapped in a giant fishbowl," one man had realized. I got a good look at the playground. There was plenty of equipment, all of which seemed to be in good working order, and a long tall fence with barbed wire that surrounded us on all sides. Just as the last survivor came out, the cafeteria door slammed shut. "No entry until the bell rings," a sign said on the doors as we looked around and tried to get our bearings. This has got to be some kind of crazy dream. What is this, Lord of the Flies? A woman asked as she had approached a tall juniper tree that was growing near the center of the playground. There were names carved on it, hundreds of them, and tally marks too, counting the days stuck in here. I realized as I saw that they covered the entire base of the tree. And then we heard a strange whirring noise and we watched as some of the equipment seemed to move on its own as if someone was using it. Something tells me this is going to be worse than before, the man said as the ground below us started to shift from grass to sand. One man was standing there watching as it did and then realizing that he was sinking even as I climbed into a jungle gym. "It's quicksand," I shouted to the others. Everyone frantically ran as the sand started to swallow people whole. Half of us made it to the different pieces of equipment, using them as lifelines until the strange sand had disappeared. And then we heard a bell from the cafeteria ring and saw the children standing and beckoning us back inside. I cautiously touched the ground, looking at all of the different splotches of blood that were trailing the grounds, and I swallowed my breath. Something told me that there would not be any graduating ceremony anytime soon. We all lined up on a brick wall with bleachers facing opposite of us in what looks like an old school gymnasium. This entire place has been built to resemble the type of places that we went to as children, but I know that it can't be the same thing, considering all the insane stuff we have endured thus far. There are still plenty of us alive, but from the moment that we stepped into the gym, I realized that probably wouldn't last long. The children that seemingly were in charge of this place lined up on either side of the squeaky clean tile floor. All of them were holding a bright and shiny red leather ball. I knew immediately what we're going to play, even as one boy steps up to the middle and holds the ball up. PE will include dodgeball, jump rope, and then a physical fitness class. Remember to do your best. I'm so sore from the other incidents that I wonder if I'll even have the ability to make it through these unscathed. But I know that I don't have a choice. We work together and we can make it out of here, the petite girl next to me said as a whistle was blown. A second later, the spheres the children were holding changed from harmless, ordinary dodgeballs to spiky, dangerous, urchin-type objects. I knew one hit from those sharp protrusions would likely kill us if it struck a vital organ. Immediately, the children began to hurl the dense weapons towards us, the heavy balls surprisingly bouncing and moving across the gym floor with ease. We had little chance to do much else besides run. Toward the bleachers, one man shouted excitedly. A woman beside him was struck on the head with the spiky object, the full force of the needles piercing her face and knocking her down. As soon as it did, I also noticed that the needle seemed to latch onto her cheek, preventing her from being able to remove it. A moment later as we ran, I realized why that was. We heard this soft, rhythmic beeping noise coming from the dodgeball. It got faster and faster as I understood it was counting down. And then the latched weapon exploded directly on the woman's face, ending her instantly. The man to the right of us was a little luckier, if you consider the loss of a limb better than dying, and his right leg was blown up from the force of another object. As he hobbled and crawled toward the bleachers, he begged the children to stop. But they all looked at him with emotionless eyes and then raised their weapons, smashing it down on his pleading body. We turned away before the explosion caused them to scatter across the gym. "This is madness," a woman snarled as she rushed toward one of the children. I watched as the dodgeball struck her straight into the chest, but she kept running, tackling one of the children. To my horror, the bomb went off, taking them both out. And then a sharp alarm noise came overhead, and all of the children stopped what they were doing. A moment later, the mascot entered, the ridiculous costume creature, waddling over to where the kid had died and examining the scene. It occurred to me that the children seemed to be in awe of the mascot, as though awaiting its order. Was it the one that was really in control here? "Looks like all of you will be getting detention," it said in that same no voice. Was it even human? "Enough of this. Who's in charge here?" one man snapped. He stepped toward the walrus boldly, and I fully expected to see that the children might attack again. But instead, the stuffed walrus held up a flipper and kept them at bay, remarking, "All class members who make it to the end of the day will be hearing an important message from the principal at our award ceremony." "I think this thing is just a freaking robot," the girl commented. I realized that I felt silly for not even thinking of that a moment ago, and watched as the walrus left with the remains of the child. Whoever was running the show clearly cared a little about the kids that were here, but why none of them seemed to be remotely acting like regular children was beyond me. And before I really had a chance to even ponder it, the main kid in charge announced that we were beginning the next activity. "Please choose a partner for jump rope," the children ordered. I looked toward the girl, figuring that with her slim figure, it was a safe bet that she could make it through to the next game. "I'm John, by the way." I offered my hand out to her. "Why does it matter? We're probably going to die in here anyway," she said as she refused my friendship but added, "I'm only going to partner with you to make sure I make it to the next activity alive." The others that were still alive did the same, and then we were placed in the center of the floor, and the children brought out a normal-looking rope that they extended between our feet. As an added challenge, they next bound our feet with chains, and one older girl in the group commented, "We want you to act as a team." As they came up to me, I got a good look at the boy that was chaining me down and saw that he had a tattoo on his ankle. "What's your name?" I whispered to him. "Those sorts of things don't matter here," he answered back. I tried to look for some spark of humanity left in him, and wondered briefly if any of these kids were even real either. Was the entire facility run by lifelike drones? The whistle pierced the air a second later and the rope began to move. Quickly, my partner and I jumped in. I matched her rhythm, worried about what would happen if we missed. A moment later, the rope caught on fire, the burning heat making me begin to sweat, as the kids strategically made their rope move faster at a steady pace. The girl and I did a good job for a short minute, but then as they began to speed up, the flames would hit our ankles almost every jump. It made me want to cripple over in pain. 2 women behind us tripped from the rope and were burnt badly, and they fell down on the floor, begging the children to stop. "Where are your parents? Why are you doing this?" Thankfully, it seemed as though death was not their immediate fate, as the children moved on to other participants and started to perform a double dutch with their other members, making it twice as hard to avoid the flaming rope as they sped up. I could hardly keep going even after 2 minutes, and the heat seemed to get even more intense. Finally, after about half of our group was hit by the blazing weapon, they moved on to the next activity. All of the remaining adults that hadn't been burned were told to wait in the locker room for further instruction. As we were huddled inside the tight space and the doors were locked, I realized that this was the first time since the playground that we were all alone. If anyone has any ideas on how to get out of here, it's appreciated, the girl commented as she rubbed her sore ankles. I was in so much pain that my entire body felt numb. I had no idea if that was a blessing or a curse, to be honest. The weird mascot mentioned in a award ceremony later, probably back at the cafeteria, but I think that I saw a main office near the front of the building. I bet you anything there's a control room up there. Someone must be in charge of telling these children what to do, a man said. And how do you suggest that we get there? Seems every move we make is monitored, I asked. We'll work together, just like I said. These are just kids. They can't stop us if we use force, the girl offered. A woman next to her shuffled her feet uncomfortably. I don't know if I can justify doing that to kids. It's likely they have been brainwashed to obey. We shouldn't be hurting them even if they're doing this to us, she admitted. I felt the same, but I didn't say a word. It was clear the majority was ready for this nightmare to end. If we can get the people in charge to end this idiocy, maybe it'll save the kids too. The needs of the many will be accomplished by just a few, the man argued. You're just speculating. We don't even know if any of this will work, another said. Soon, the locker room burst into an argument, and the doors slammed open a second later, and one of the older children gave us a glare. The physical fitness test will now begin, she announced, leading us back to the gym. All of the adults that had suffered from injuries were gone and now in the middle of the floor. I saw that, well, the actual tile was missing. I even rubbed my eyes to be sure that I wasn't imagining things. It was in fact cut off by what looked like a bottomless hole, a chasm that cut through the whole area. I tried to look down and see if there was anything below, but it seemed to stretch on for miles, perhaps into some furnace below. And dangling over the pit was a rope, which seemed to be covered with oil to make the climb even more difficult. Did the children even understand they were literally making us risk our lives? I was placed in front of the line and I waited as the bell rang. The rope was only a few feet in front of me, but I still had to make a running start for it. Leaping out above the pit, I gripped onto the slippery rope and quickly started to climb. Even with the oily surface, it was still possible for me to ascend, but not easily. I could hear the others actually cheering me on as I tried to not look down. But just when I thought that I might make it, the game changed and something above me fell through the roof vents. Needles. Sharp pointed ends struck my head and against my hands as I clung to the rope and shivered in pain. It wouldn't be long before I lost my grip entirely. My only chance was to try and swing back toward the edge. I started to shift my body weight as I slid down the rope, my hands sweaty in the onslaught of falling needles, making my nerves begin to stress and ache. Just as I had made the third swing, I let go, barely grabbing the edge. The others rushed to help, but the children blocked them. If I was going to survive, it would have to be on my own. Desperately, I clawed my way up the side, gasping for breath as I collapsed to the ground and looked down at the pit. This is insane. I can barely even stand up from this, I moaned as I looked at my shaking palms. The needles had hurt more than I had realized. The children looked at me and then the oldest one in charge ordered, "Take him to the nurse." Before I knew what was happening, I was escorted out of the gym by several larger kids, toward the office that the one man had speculated we might be able to use as an escape. A bag was placed over my head before they marched me down the hall, shoving me rudely as they moved forward. Eventually, I was placed in a chair and my hands were bound with a zip tie, and then the bag was removed and I found myself staring at another adult, somebody that was running this whole thing. She gave me a fiendish smirk and said, "It looks like you thought you were going home early." The nurse administered some kind of shot directly into my bloodstream without even bothering to tell me what it was for. As I watched the needle press into my body, I was sure that I was about to die. Instead of a quick death like the other adults here, it would be slow and this strange woman would revel in my suffering. Immediately, I started to sweat and feel faint, my lips clammy as I begged her to stop. The entire room felt dizzy, and then at last, she tossed the needle aside into a sharps container and commented, "My, you are certainly a squealer, aren't you?" I was panting, hardly able to see or speak coherently, but it didn't matter. She was going to make me listen to her strange ramblings. "You have been brought here for a reason, student 6091, and that is to prove yourself worthy of readmission to society. Given your skills so far in our school activities, you stand in a high probability of being a graduate of our program," she commented as she pulled a file from a nearby metallic cabinet and read off my life as though I had died long ago. "John Reeder is age 32, a single father living in the suburbs of Chicago. You have 2 children, David and Susanna, ages 8 and 4 respectively. You work as an auto mechanic and enjoy chess matches and hiking in your spare time," she commented as she slid the profile across to me. "Does all of this sound accurate?" Despite how parched I was, I managed to give her a whispered reply. "I have no idea what you want, but once I get out of these bonds, I swear that I'll kill you." She leaned over toward me, smiling quietly before smacking me across the face with her gloved hand. "You will learn that we do not tolerate insubordination in this facility of any kind. Do I need to remind you why you're here?" she snapped. She turned the folder over to the next page, which showed photographs of me having drinks with friends, spending time at work at long hours, and not coming home to be with my family. Things that I had felt guilty for over the past 6 months, bad habits that I was struggling to cope with. And here they were on display as crimes, my sins that had landed me in this place. "You are fortunate that the charges aren't more severe, or we wouldn't even be having this conversation. You have forsaken your family, Mr. Readers. You have fallen into a lifestyle of pleasure rather than responsibility. As a result, you squander what money you earn and your children starve. You're a poor excuse for a father and therefore unfit to return to being a parent until you're taught a proper education." I didn't fully comprehend what she was saying, but I gathered that this prison was a place for people like me to be rehabilitated under whatever strict guidelines they enforced. A second chance according to their standards to be a better person. And if we failed to be strong enough, then a deadly fate awaited us. I knew her logic about health and recovery and being a good parent didn't line up with the atrocities that I had seen her so far, but I was too frightened to even correct her. "When is this graduation ceremony?" I asked. "Tonight after the final period. We will gather our students together in the band hall for a celebration and announce the graduates. But to make it there, I need to make sure that you are on equal footing with the others. Hence the need for your little injection," she commented. I looked toward the needle, wondering what exactly she had dosed me with, as a bell rung and the nurse stood up, pleasantly smiling. "Enjoy the rest of your school day, Mr. Readers. I hope to see you again tonight. I think if you apply yourself to your education, you will go far," she said. I was marched by children back down the hallway, confused and disoriented, even without a bag over my head, as we passed by what looked like class photographs of previous graduates. As I paused to look at the numerous alumni, it occurred to me this secretive program had been running for quite some time undetected. Who could be handling all of the finances, and how did they even find people to be candidates for their experimental prison? Another sobering fact was evident about the photographs. Less than half a dozen persons were in each picture. The rest of the seats were empty, meaning the chance of survival here was slim, perhaps nigh impossible. Still, I had to think of my own 2 children and fight to survive as long as I could, even if it did mean against the others, I thought as I was escorted into an art studio. There were perhaps only 9 of us left, and as soon as I had entered the classroom, each of them viewed me with new suspicion. I mean, it's easy to guess why. I had been given special privileges to not go through with the remainder of the fitness test, and that must mean that they think I'm involved in whatever is going on. I thought as the children ordered me to take a seat near one of the easels. Our teacher, the strange emotionless, costumed walrus, immediately gave us instructions on the assignment. Each of you is filled with inspiration, aspiring dreams that are waiting to burst forth. Here we get the chance to express ourselves and show our achievements on the canvas, he explained as the children locked the doors. Whatever was about to happen, I knew good and well it was not going to be as pleasant as he claimed. Under your desk, you will find the tools you need to create a masterpiece, something that truly speaks to us and helps to see what type of artist and person you really are, the mascot said. All of us reached down to take a small black bag from the underside of the desk, unzipping it to reveal razor blades and other sharp objects that typically people would use for other things, and the costume mascot explained. You have 30 minutes to put your sweat, tears, and especially your own blood into your work. Those that put in the most effort will get to move forward to the next class. So try your hardest and work for a better grade than your classmates. Immediately, a timer was started above his head, and I looked at the objects in horror, realizing that he expected us to actually use ourselves as paint for the project. The others hesitated and started using the objects on their skin, wincing and shrieking as the red dribbled onto the paper. One woman had a different type of masterpiece than mine though, and immediately lashed out toward one of the other adults, taking them down to the ground. Surprisingly, the costumed mascot did nothing to stop it, and after she had taken out her art partner, the woman had announced, I found out that she had been sleeping with my husband, so this is my artist's depiction of what I want to do to him. The mascot nodded and announced, you get a 90, head for the music room and enjoy your extra recess. She dropped the object and stepped over the body, leaving the rest of us confused and befuddled, but also no less suspicious of each other. What about you, John? What did you do? The petite woman that I had talked to earlier asked as she held the blade safely in between her knuckles. I couldn't tell if she intended to do the same thing to me as well. None of us could be certain what the others were capable of. As I looked down at the mess though, I began to dizzy and I stumbled across the room to vomit. It had to be the side effects of whatever the nurse had given me, designated to make me incapable of completing this task. I realized as I vomited in the trash can several times and felt the room begin to spin. One man tried to approach to help, but I pushed him away, uncertain if those in charge would view it as cheating. I needed to act fast, and the only thing that I could think of was to use the object against myself and threaten to do it. If this is really supposed to be about rehabilitation, then let the rest live. Let us get out of here, I demanded. The children actually seemed to show emotion for a split second, as I held the object against my body, where I knew the most red could be spilled. It was a bluff, but I needed to see if my guest was right about this demented facility. Would they allow me to survive simply because of their twisted moral code? That will be enough, the mascot bellowed, motioning for everyone in the class to stop. He went from desk to look at the artwork, supposedly grading each and every one of us as though what really mattered. It felt like our survival was going to be the toss of the dice. Myself, the petite woman, and 2 others were told that we could head to the music hall. I knew that meant that the others wouldn't make it, and as the object was wrestled from my hand, I considered trying to stand up for them. I have to be able to make it back to my own family. I kept reminding myself as I felt the strangest shot the nurse had given me start to take effect. If I don't push forward, it will all be for nothing. Somehow I got the impression the others were told to leave, had the same guilty conscience, and we all reluctantly were led away. Even as the art studio doors closed in, we heard the ones left behind begging for their lives. A roar of gunfire and paintballs filled the air, and we heard their screams grow higher almost to a crescendo, until at last everything became silent. And then paint and red mixed together, drained from underneath the door. A sickening feeling in the bottom of my stomach as I realized that the 4 of us were the only ones still standing for this final round. We were taken to a music hall where the children told us to pick out an instrument, and I found myself hardly able to stand up from another bout of nausea. And then as I finally reached the flute stand near the middle of the class, I saw the playbook was open to a song that told me my suspicion was right. We were nearly at the end of this mad game. They were going to force us to play the ceremonial orchestra, followed by a funeral procession theme. Slow, soothing music began to play as all of us took our seats and watched the children line up against the wall. Despite the pretense that everything was fine, I knew good and well that only a few of us would survive this final test. I didn't know the people alongside me in this class, but I still couldn't believe that all of them might be gone in a few minutes. As the music got a little faster, the children ordered us to start playing, and we all did our best to keep up. Now, I've never ever had a talent for music, but I tried my hardest to appease them even as I felt the room beginning to move. Everything was suddenly shifting around as we kept playing, the room rotating as we saw behind the walls a row of strange small holes that had sharp spikes poking straight out. I knew that if we stayed where we were sitting at the moment, we would be impaled in only a matter of seconds, so immediately I tried to stand, only for something to shock me and cause me to collapse back into my seat. "The performance mustn't stop," a child said as the room kept rotating. We all reluctantly played, and as we did, I noticed the room begin to move the other way. Someone was actually getting the music right. "Keep playing correctly," I shouted to the woman. She had a trombone, and I could tell that she was exhausted, but we couldn't afford any mistakes. One man was about to be hit by the deadly darts, and he tried to flee, only for the agonizing shock to cripple him and cause him to flail backwards towards the weapon. He screamed in pain as he made contact with the spike, but it didn't finish him. We kept playing to the end of the song to keep the rest of us alive. As the chorus came to an end, the room stopped moving and the children cheered. Some even suggested an encore. I could tell that the woman who had kept us alive those few minutes wouldn't have the strength to play again, and thankfully the encore wasn't required. To my surprise, as we were moved from the band hall toward the mess hall, I saw the nurse from earlier waiting for us with what looked like awards. Since there were only 3 of us left, I was hoping this meant that all of us would get the chance to make it out of here. But I noticed she was only carrying 2 awards. One of us would be put to the test a final time. I realized as we were told to stand at the center of the stage. "All of you have managed to come so far in this program, and we can't thank you enough for all of your hard work to reach the top of your class," the nurse had announced. As she was talking, I saw that the auditorium was filling up with children. I was surprised to see that there were so many of them. At first, it was just a dozen, but then I realized that there were hundreds of them. Did they all live here in this underground place? How did they survive? "Before we pass out the awards, I think it's time for a quick snack for all of you," the nurse said as doors at the back of the cafeteria opened and I saw more adults rolling in carts. I held my nose as the stench of rotting meat overpowered me, and I saw that they were actually being fed the bodies of all the other adults that hadn't made it this far. The children didn't even wait for a serving bell. They growled and snapped at one another to grab a piece of the chopped up bodies, and they chewed it as fast as they could. I felt like I was about to throw up again by watching what was happening. Now I knew what these children were being turned into. Monsters. I didn't care to have any other questions answered, too sickened by the realization that if we had lost, we would be in that meal as well. To my surprise, the petite woman that had been here since the beginning reached for my hand. Her eyes filled with tears as we listened to the children eat the bodies of our competition. "My name is Sam, by the way," she whispered as her lips trembled and the children finished the last bits of meat. For a moment, there was a connection between us, a mutual understanding that we didn't deserve this treatment, despite whatever issues we had in our real life. Nothing could even come close to this level. And then the nurse got out a raffle ball and started to spin it, the numbers clattering around as the hungry children waited to hear who would be crowned the champion. I didn't have to guess what would happen to the loser. "Our graduate in this class is none other than John Readers. Step up here, John," she announced. Immediately, the children moved towards Sam and to the others, ready to pull down and eat them as well. I tried my best to hold on to her for as long as I could, her screaming and kicking the entire time. "You will forget about this place soon enough, John. I knew you would make it. Come, as we get you ready to leave, there is one final thing I need to show you," the nurse ordered. I tried to keep from looking as the children trampled and attacked my friends. I was so traumatized by the event, I found myself shaking as I moved towards the back hallway. I'm sure by now you recognize that this entire process was orchestrated to make you a better person, but we couldn't have done this without people that were in predicaments just like yours. Down on their luck, angry with loved ones, scorned. "We want to offer you the chance to be able to recommend a future student to us," she said, passing me a small pamphlet. "You mean someone to send here to die?" I realized. "Well, if they can survive our test, they'll be fine," she commented softly. She soon led me to what looked like an old elevator that had a key code to prevent anyone from entering, and as she got me ready to leave, she added, "Just think over all that you have learned here, and I'm sure you'll see the benefits to our program." And then she injected me with another dosage, a strong sedative this time, and pushed me into the elevator. I couldn't even open my mouth to scream as the door slammed shut, and I found myself getting dizzy. The last thing I remember was the elevator rising toward the surface. When I did wake up, I was in the middle of a heavily wooded area. It felt surreal to imagine that everything I experienced was real. The pamphlet the nurse had given me was more than enough proof. In addition, the wound on my wrist was all stitched up. I walked for about a mile to the road, and from there I hitchhiked. "Where to?" a passing motorist had asked. They actually looked a bit nervous to help me, and it was then I realized that I still had the clothes from the prison underground. I probably looked like an escaped convict. I told them to take me to the nearest police station. I told them my story from start to finish. I showed them the wound on my wrist. I also insisted that they could check my clothing for fingerprints, and I gave them my pamphlet. There was nothing that matched any known criminals in their database. It suddenly occurred to me that this was likely why they had trained the children to be their foot soldiers. None of them would be traced, and likely all of them had been taken at infancy. I thanked the officers for their time and managed to get a ride home from one of them. I was desperate to see my children again. Once I got home, I made a promise to them that I would be a better father. I can only hope that time will erase some of the awful memories of school.